Hey guys, we're here with Becky Fuda. She is the deer project leader for the state of New Hampshire's Fish and Game Department. So, we're going to ask her some questions. She's going to answer them. Everybody's got questions they always want to ask the deer project leader. I know it. So, hopefully we hit something. But you all know I'm kind of a deer geek, so we may not hit the things you want, but we're going to hit something. So, Becky, thanks for being here with us.
Thanks for having me.
It's always been my dream. I've always wanted to be a biologist my whole life. I kind of went down a different path, and now I'm trying to catch up. Becky, how about you tell us a little bit about you and your background?
Sure. Well, I'll say that I took a little bit of a roundabout route to becoming the deer biologist here. So I didn't really have a background in hunting or fishing. I grew up in Boston. Not something I like to say too often around here, but so it's not something I really knew I was going to get into when I first started in undergrad. So actually I got my undergraduate degree from Boston University in environmental science, but realized that I wanted to get into wildlife during that time. So, started out doing some different field jobs, working with all manner of things like shorebird, songbirds. Went back to school at the SUNY College of Environmental Science and Forestry, though, and got my master's in wildlife management. And since then, I've worked for a few different states. Massachusetts, briefly, as just a seasonal technician. I worked in Wyoming for a few years. I worked in Oregon for a couple years. And I worked on a lot of different species, so everything from elk to mule deer, black-tailed deer, grizzly bears, wolves. So I have kind of a varied background, but was really looking to get back to the Northeast. And so I was excited when the deer biologist job opened up in New Hampshire and applied, and was very excited when I got it about a little less than a year and a half ago.
So what is it about the deer that made you want that position?
Well, I mean, deer management is always pretty exciting, just in that white-tailed deer is probably the most hunted species in North America, so people are really passionate about it.
That's true.
And that makes it exciting, I think.
Yeah. So you've got a lot. I mean, you're basically in your hands. You're holding the most popular game animal in the state, if not all of the Northeast and all of the country. So, do you go home at night sometimes hoping that you've done the right thing? I mean, is it?
Yeah, I think it's important to keep in mind, even though I'm the deer project leader, we have a whole team of people here. So it's not like I'm making some sort of unilateral decisions or anything like that. So any decisions that I make are really more proposals. So as you know, we have a whole public process. Things get approved by the commission, but we also have our game team here that before we even propose anything to the public, we meet with the game team. So, I get the perspective of everybody, of our moose biologist and our bear biologist and our small game biologist. So I get to benefit from everybody else's experience as well. So hopefully I don't spend too much time losing sleep.
Well, that's good. I didn't want you to do that, because the deer hunters in the state and the people who enjoy the deer, they're all pretty decent about seeing different avenues of how you're managing. So let's go into the new proposal that we had that as it's going to JL Carr. So I'm praying it passes. Let's talk about the difference in populations throughout the state and how that determines the bag limits throughout the state.
So we have our game management plan, right? So our game management plan was first put into place in the most recent one in 2016. So we have 10-year plans, right? So we're operating under that plan. So we have 20 wildlife management units. Each wildlife management unit has an objective. That objective is in terms of adult buck kill. So that's what we use as an index to the population, right? So currently, most of our units are above objective. The only ones that aren't, well, I should say no, that's not true. Most of them are at or above objective. The only ones that aren't are north of the White Mountains now. We have a few units up north that are still below objective, have mostly started to show some increasing trends up there. But the primary way that we try to influence deer populations in New Hampshire is through manipulating, you said bag limits, so it's not quite bag limits, but the way we do it here in New Hampshire is through, as you know, the number of either sex days.
Right.
So either sex or any deer days. So by allowing a greater harvest of any deer day, any deer, or basically allowing more antlerless harvest, you're gonna have a greater effect on the population, because that's the productive part of the population. That adult does are what you need most to grow your population. So, for example, if we have a unit that's well above objective, we might look into expanding the number of any deer or either sex days, and that's with our latest proposal. That's what we're doing in, I think, 13 of the 20 units. So.
Yeah, I can see where bucks are the most popular with most hunters. Everybody, I hear it all the time. People say, I just want to shoot a deer, but when that big rack buck comes out in the field, that's the one they choose. So, but with that being said, the does really do run the population.
Right.
So.
Right, because the does are going to be creating those.
It only takes
new
one
bucks.
buck.
Yeah,
Right? So,
they're going to create the bucks for next year.
And I think a lot of people have had questions about why there isn't more doe days, and not taking into effect that there's a population aspect to it.
Right.
Yeah. So, as far as the North Country goes, what is keeping the North Country, in your opinion, what is keeping the North Country from meeting their goal? What's keeping them under?
I know several years ago we had a harsh winter up there, so New Hampshire is close to the northern edge of whitetail deer range, so even though a lot of our winters have become milder in recent years, we still do sometimes have a real harsh winter, and especially up there. And so there's still the capacity that a tough winter is going to knock that population back. There may be some changes in land use up there that could be affecting it. Tough to say for sure, but like I said, they're not far below objective.
It's not like they're
not way low. So if we have a couple more, we did have a very mild winter this year. Absolutely. So with another mild winter and the fact that there's no opportunity for harvesting antlerless deer during muzzleloader or firearm season right now up there, hopefully that will allow those populations to get back up to that objective.
Do you guys have any input on the state's habitat, any of the forestry programs or anything in the state to help build food for the deer or anything like that?
Yeah, so we have a separate habitat program that does a really great job at managing our state lands. Doing things like creating more early successional habitat that might provide better forage for deer, right? Like shrublands and younger forest habitats. And so they do a really, really great job at that. We also have regional biologists that might comment on like timber harvests in like state forests, properties that are run by other state agencies, more in terms of protecting deer wintering areas.
Right.
So we do, it's not necessarily me, but we have regional biologists around the state that can provide their input on those types of projects to make sure that we're protecting those important areas.
Semi-symbiotic. It kind of works hand in hand. In the North Country, when you guys are making your management decisions, moose and deer are kind of have a love-hate relationship as far as brainworm and other problems. does that go into effect with, especially in the North Country, because that's basically it's moose country up there.
Mm-hmm.
Does that go into effect of making decisions on what your goal is itself for the deer?
So up north, I mean, the primary issue up north has more to do with winter tick than
Okay.
brainworm as far.
Right.
I'm not the moose biologist, as
Right.
you know, but as far as I understand, the research that was done within the last decade found that winter tick
Mm-hmm.
was really the primary driving factor that was causing increased mortality of moose
Mm-hmm.
up there. So that has less to do with deer.
Mm-hmm.
But as you know, brainworm is an issue, and it's something that we see in New Hampshire. You know, south of the White Mountains, we have much higher densities where you might expect more of an impact from brainworm because we have higher densities of deer,
Right.
on moose. It's not something that we've really concentrated on. Well, it's not something that it's something we're aware of, but we haven't done any research on that yet. But certainly might be a topic for exploration in the future.
And I'm bringing this up because in the Ruger North property that the state has, and in the Guile Forest, it's kind of the area that I'm in. We've seen in the past areas that had infected moose with brainworm, and we found carcasses and whatnot. And I was just wondering if you went to the North Country and you increased the population of whitetails, how much that would have a problem with the two species interacting.
Right. I don't know that we really have enough information to say for sure. I think there is some research out there that has looked at densities of whitetails and where you would expect to see an impact from brainworm on moose. But that said, we certainly wouldn't want to manage one at the expense of the other. So I think you bring up a good point, and especially we'll be writing the game management plan again in 2026. Well, it'll go into effect in 2026, so we'll be working on it in the next few years, and it may be something that we need to consider. But I think we're not looking to. Currently, our objectives would not increase the deer populations up north much.
No.
They're really just below those objectives right now, and those objectives are kind of within the historic range, right?
Yeah.
It's not like our goal is to have deer in the North Country be way higher than they've ever been.
Right.
So that's not our goal. They're all kind of sort of in the middle there of where they've been historically.
Right. Yeah, that was I guess my question was, it's not something that's projected in because at some of the meetings we've heard people complain there's not enough deer in the North Country, we need more, and I understand hunters. We used to go to the North Country and hunt, and when we went to the North Country and hunt, we understood that we weren't going to see the numbers you would in the southeast corner of the state. You were looking for that big, big-bodied northern whitetail.
Right.
But some people seem to want more of that, but it doesn't seem. I don't believe, and I don't know what your opinion is. I don't think that that's a possibility to make more bigger. Usually, if you have more, they're smaller. I guess.
Yeah. Well. I think people need to be realistic in their expectations, right? Like I said, we're gonna have harsh winters up there, and this is New Hampshire. It's not. We're not talking about the South or the Midwest. We don't have really productive soils. We're just not gonna have deer densities up there that you might see in some other parts of the country.
And that was a good segue, because that was one of my other questions was. You've been around the country. You've been in many different states, and you've seen the strengths and the weaknesses in these states. In New Hampshire, if you had to pick one habitat or one part of our environment that is the weak link in, let's say, and I get this all the time from people that they want, if you let all the little ones go, they'll grow giant. But the thing is, what is our weak link that keeps these Kansas and Ohio and these giant style bucks from showing up?
In terms of antlers, you mean?
Antlers or body size or
Well,
body size. We have big body size.
Yeah,
we have that.
right.
But that's Bergman's rules to me. But as far as getting these deer to get to that Boone and Crockett trophy size, let's say, what is that weak link? And I mean, I know what I believe, but it'd be nice to hear from you.
There are multiple factors that go into antler size. But a lot of it is based on nutrition, and so, like I was saying, we have poor soils.
You can say
New
crappy.
Hampshire.
You can say crappy. We're
and it's just not as productive habitat as you're going to see in the Midwest or the South, and our deer put their energy into making big bodies more than making big antlers, right? We have those harsh winters, and it's more beneficial for them to increase their body size than to grow really big antlers.
And for those of you who don't know what Bergman's rule is, please go look it up and you'll understand what we're talking about here. But yeah, I believe it's the soil. I think our soil is crappy. I'll say crappy, but it could be a lot better. And that's kind of what when we're doing my business, we try to make the soil better, and you got to start with a good foundation. So, is there any PSA? Is there something that you'd like to get out to help, people who like to watch deer, people who want deer on their property, hunters, anything? Is there, is there something that can be just something that's been bugging you that you'd like to get out there? We're open to all this stuff.
Well, I always like to use any opportunity I have to remind folks about our CWD regulations, if I could do that. As a lot of folks probably know, CWD is present in 30 states, and it's been spreading throughout the country and even into some other countries. And we have never detected it in New Hampshire. We've tested over 8,000 deer since 2002. We would like to keep it that way, at least for as long as possible. So just reminding hunters that hunt in other states to follow our carcass importation regulations. So if you hunt in a state where CWD has been detected, you can only bring back boned out meat, taxidermy mounts, antlers with a clean skull cap. You can see all those details on our website. And just a reminder, other ways that folks can, help prevent the spread of CWD. We always tell people don't feed deer, not just for CWD, but for any disease. We don't want to be artificially concentrating wildlife into small areas because that's going to facilitate the spread of disease. We also encourage people not to use natural urine-based lures because some of those lures are produced in states that have CWD, and so they encourage people to either use synthetic lures or just not to use lures at all.
What about lures that come from companies that have the tested facilities? Tested facilities.
So that is a tough one, mostly because the test has not been approved by USDA, and also there's no oversight. So it's kind of a difficult thing to say for sure that those lures are CWD free.
So that would go under the feeding and whatnot. We don't condone the feeding. I'm not going to lie. We used to do it years ago because we listened to the hype. We thought that it was the right thing to do to build your giant deer. It doesn't quite work that way. Nowadays, what we try to do is we try to build the properties so there's more actual quality food on it, and I think and it works better.
Yeah.
Trust me, guys. You can feed deer all the corn and wildlife feed you want, but if you have a new clear cut, you're going to grow deer a lot better and a lot easier, and it's going to benefit you by you get money out of your forest. So that's a better way to do it than feeding and spending $1,200 a month on grain. So, and I think I'm being a little conservative with that. So,
Wow.
Is Fish and Game concerned with the amount of now that we're being able to shoot multiple bucks? We get the question all the time that people are concerned that we're shooting too many bucks and everything. Is that something the department is concerned with at all?
No, because we know from our harvest data that only a really small percentage of hunters actually harvest more than one buck. Even a small percentage only harvest more than one deer, much less more than one buck. Right. Because you have to remember that some of those tags are going to antlerless deer as well. Mm-hmm. But during our biocheck days, which is when we send our biologists out to check stations and we collect data on deer sex, age, antler beam diameter, all sorts of information about the population, that allows us to get an estimate of buck age structure. Mm-hmm. And so we know we have a healthy age structure in New Hampshire. If our bucks were really getting hammered and we were killing 80% of them every year, we would see that in the age structure. Yeah. And we're not. It's something around 45% of the bucks that are killed in New Hampshire are yearlings. So 55% are 2.5 years of age and older. If we started to see a huge shift in that, maybe that's something that we would look at in the mm-hmm. future, but it stayed pretty steady for quite some time.
So what's more of a concern, more younger bucks being shot or more older bucks? Is it, I would think younger, but.
So if you're just shooting most of your bucks every year, you're going to start to have an age structure where most of your bucks are yearlings, because it's only most of the ones that survived are just the fawns from the previous year.
Hello, Vermont.
And so that's like an issue that Pennsylvania saw. Right. I think that it was back in the 90s or early 2000s. But we don't have that issue here. And that, it's not necessarily a biological issue most of the time. You hear a lot of stuff about breeding ecology and timing of the breeding and whether or not the age structure really influences that. Hasn't really panned out in a lot of the research mm-hmm. that's been done. But it is an issue in terms of hunter satisfaction, right? Exactly. And so we would be concerned if all you could get out there was a yearling buck, because we know that our hunters want to see some of those older bucks, and they mm-hmm. want to see the scrapes, and they want to see the rubs, and you need to have a healthy age structure to have that hunter satisfaction.
I can't remember how many years ago it was, we had an antler restriction in the North Country. Mm-hmm. And it didn't quite pan out the way they had expected. I mean, it seems to work. I don't want to say it works, because it seems to work in Vermont. But they had a completely different problem that we had. Do you, in your opinion, because the only reason I bring this up is we mm-hmm. heard a few people say this in one of the meetings that we had, where people were saying bring it back because there's too many. Do you think that's a viable solution, or does it depend on the issue we have?
I guess, my question is, what's the problem that we're mm-hmm. trying to solve? So from my perspective, we have a healthy age structure. I mean, not from my perspective, but from the data that we have. And so the reason why that antler point restriction was removed was due to concerns about high grading. Mm-hmm. And so I don't want to comment on Vermont's restriction, just because I don't have all the information on that. And I wasn't around for the antler point restriction we had up north, because it was mm-hmm. some time ago. But the high grading, there's been some studies that have found issues with high grading when you have an APR, and some that haven't. So my understanding is that it was a 2-point APR. Mm-hmm. And so if you think about it, if you are harvesting anything above 2-point APR, and some of those are yearlings. You're basically protecting the yearlings that potentially have inferior genetics.
Right.
Now, as we know, it's not just genetics that goes into antler development. So there's some question there. I think different studies have found different things, but my understanding is that the data in New Hampshire saw a decrease in antler size when you separate it out by age class. So that was the concern about high grading. That's why it was removed. To me, like I said, we don't have an issue. There's no biological reason for it because we have a healthy age structure.
Yeah.
You can put it in an APR, and the primary impact is going to be that you're going to shift a lot of your harvest from 1.5-year-olds to 2.5-year-olds.
Right.
You may see a decrease in overall harvest. And so it's something that, from my perspective, I would want to feel confident that the vast majority of hunters really want that. Because my personal, I think you're forcing it on everyone if you install that, and everyone may not feel that way. If some folks feel that they want to pass up on a 1.5-year-old buck, then they should go ahead and make that choice for themselves. But not everyone feels that way. Some folks are happy with just harvesting any buck or even harvesting any deer.
You just made a whole bunch of friends I got out there.
And I know that we have done some surveys that have showed that it's not a vast majority of hunters out there that want that, and so we need to consider that. Hunters that want that, they can make the choice to pass up those bucks if that's really what they want to see out there.
I agree. And I've heard from other people, like, why don't we have a bow-only zone, trophy area, that kind of stuff? And, I heard, trust me, I've got a lot of friends, I get a lot of people, I hear a lot of crazy stuff, but there are bow-only zones. Bear Brook's a bow-only zone. Are you seeing giant antlered bucks coming out of there? I don't think you do, but I don't think that that's the answer. There's no magic bullet. Basically, it's just there's only 3 things that grow antlers, and that's age, nutrition, and genetics, and there's only 2 of them we can somewhat control.
Right.
The rest of it is up to nature itself.
Right.
So there's no magic bullets. Stop giving me these stupid ideas. All right? The online registration. I'm getting people, like I said, I get a lot of people talking to me.
Okay.
Some people love it. Some people love the idea. And some people are, I think maybe some of the people who've had to deal with people who are less than honest, I'll say, saying that it's not a good way to go because I'm not sure all the arguments, but some people do like it, some people don't. What do you see as the pros for that? As far as, because my concern is gathering information. I know you guys, you can get into how you're going to gather any of the biological information now with the online registration.
Yeah, so online registration is going, for the first time this fall, going to be an option. So people that want to register their deer in person will still be able to do that. In terms of our bio-check days, or biological check stations that we run, we're still going to be doing that the same way that we used to do it. So during the first 2 days of muzzleloader and the first 3 days of firearms, online registration will be unavailable. So on those 5 days, everybody has to go to the physical check station, and that will allow us to still collect the same data that we've been collecting on the same days, essentially, that we've been collecting it for the last many years. I'm not sure how many years we've been doing it, a long time. And so nothing's going to change. We'll still be able to get that information on antler size, age, lactation rates, all that, sex.
All the fun stuff.
Yep.
What do you think I know this is a broad question. I'm trying to paint this with a broad stroke, but what do you think the sex ratio is in the state. If you had to really give me a kind of a generalization.
Oh, I think it probably, if we're talking about like pre-hunt adult sex ratios, we don't estimate it generally. You can kind of get an indirect estimate using some of the information we collect at biocheck stations. I haven't done that in recent years, but I know looking back at some old data, it mostly ranged from like 2 to 3.
Okay.
And yeah, people get really focused on sex ratios. I hear a lot about sex ratios, but I think what's important to know in New Hampshire is that we have a very healthy, productive deer population, and we know that from research that was conducted back in, like, I think it was 2014, 2015, in that range. So that research project looked at roadkill does and looked at the percentage that was pregnant, which was like 100%, very close to 100% for adult does.
Yeah.
And so we know we don't have any problem with
Right.
breeding, and then you can actually look at the fetuses and the length of the fetus to backdate and get an estimate of when that doe was bred. And so then if you look at the range of all the dates of when the does were bred, you can see that we have a very tight breeding window in New Hampshire.
Yeah.
So most of our does are bred during that second, third week of November. And that's important because up in the Northeast where you have harsh winters, you want them all to be born right around that early June time when there's going to be a lot of good food for them available. And they can, if they're all born around the same time, we have that what's called predator swamping, where they're all born at once and the predators can't get them all. So I think that's, I think people get concerned about sex ratios in part because they're concerned about healthy reproduction. At least that's the impression I get from folks that ask me about it. And like I said, while we don't necessarily always estimate sex ratios, we have no reason to believe that there's an issue there.
I think that one concern that the hunters have, or and myself, is we want to see that sex ratio making it so we do have these short ruts.
Yes.
So we're not having the stress. And I'm not going to lie, because of our channel, we're basically focused on big whitetail bucks.
Right.
We want those big whitetail bucks to go into the rut and come out in the best shape they can to be able to get through the winter. So I guess I think that's a lot of what people are talking about.
Right. And like I said, we know that we have that short rut. And
which is good.
If there's where you might see some deer that are bred late, which is uncommon in New Hampshire, is fawns can actually be bred their first year. It's not common, it's around 10% or less. But they have to reach a certain body mass before they can be bred, before they'll go into estrus. And so they tend to come in to estrus later. So if there is something like that going on in terms of some late breeding, it's likely going to be those fawns. And that just means you have some healthy fawns.
And that's what everybody calls the secondary rut.
Right.
Which isn't really
it's like a blip.
Yeah, it's small.
Does can be bred by more than one buck too. They've shown, and sometimes in twins and triplets, that there's multiple paternity.
Really?
Yeah.
Now that's interesting. I did not. I know dogs can do that.
Yeah.
I did not know that
deer.
deer
Too. Yeah.
See, I've learned something today. So that's pretty. That makes a lot of sense too. I just wanted to comment that your presentation that we had here. When was that?
The season setting.
It was really good. I wanted to compliment you on that. And many of the other people who were there at that meeting also commented that you did very well.
Oh, nice.
So we just wanted to let you know that we did appreciate that. And it was very clear and concise. And we know you haven't been here as long as somebody like Andy, but I think Andy was born here.
Yeah.
And so... I hear things, okay, so ticks are a problem. Okay, and not just, we're not talking about winter ticks now, we're talking dog ticks and
Deer
ticks.
Okay.
And people are saying that's what's robbing the deer of their antler growth because they're getting too many of those. So a lot of people are saying, why can't we take a paintball gun and put like, what's the stuff we put on the dog?
Front line, you're really
Like
gonna
a front
go there?
line on the deer and kill off the ticks and knock the tick population, because it's annoying. I'm not going to admit to everybody, it is annoying. You go in the woods and you're covered in them, and they think that if we can do this, it will help drop the tick population. I know you're not an entomologist per se, but let's just explain how. I mean, we use poron on the cows, or a
type, yeah.
A type of that for the cows, and people want to do that with the tick, with the moose and the deer. Let's talk about that for a minute and see how impractical that is.
Well, so first let me ask: are they concerned about the health of the deer? Are they concerned about people getting ticks on them and Lyme disease?
It would be both.
So, first of all, there are multiple factors that go into tick abundance besides deer. In terms of white-footed mice being their, I think they're called the primary host of deer ticks. So there's been research that have looked at trying to reduce Lyme disease by reducing your deer population, and I would say the results are pretty mixed. So deer may be only one factor that's really driving that sort of thing. But in terms of treating them rather than, say, reducing the population, that would be completely impractical. In terms of, and it's certainly something we hear with
Are you
the
sure you don't want to go
moose
out with a paintball
as
gun?
well? I mean, when you consider, let's say rough estimate, we have over 100,000 deer in New Hampshire. How would you possibly get out there and hit all of them with a paintball gun? How long does it last? Do you need to hit them more than once? What kind of impacts does it have on them? Is it safe to eat them? I mean, there's just, infinite issues. We would need an agency 1 million times the size. We have one deer biologist in New Hampshire, so.
I told you guys it wasn't going to work. So when you said that people want to get rid of the deer to get rid of the ticks, it's not.
That wouldn't.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's something that we don't really hear much about that in New Hampshire, but in other parts of the Northeast where you have some really high deer populations, that's definitely something that gets brought up. And I mean, there are studies that have shown associations with, increased prevalence of Lyme disease in areas with higher deer densities. But, like I said, it's not necessarily shown to be a foolproof way of decreasing Lyme disease, because there's other factors at play. I think where they have seen success is like on islands, maybe. I think there was one study on an island where they were able to wipe out the entire population, which is obviously not something that's acceptable or desirable in most places. So.
And the deer are the breeding host. I mean, they need that last meal to get their eggs, so that's kind of part of it too. Thank you so much, Becky, for allowing us to ask you these silly questions, and hopefully we didn't bother you too much
No, not
today.
silly at all. Thanks for coming out, and it was a pleasure talking to you.
If you guys need anything here, if you need volunteers for anything, you contact us and we'll get some guys together to come help you do whatever you need to be done. So we'd love to
Appreciate
do that.
Yeah.
So anyways, thank you so much,
Thank you.
and we'll talk to you very soon.
Great.